I was thinking about winners and losers, and coincidentally, at the same time, there's this guy called Joe Rogan who's got a very big podcast. I've never actually seen it myself, but I read about it, and he was a supporter of the whole MAGA thing. But recently, like many people, he's kind of stepped back from that a little bit. And now he's talking about, instead of there being a MAGA movement, there should be a new movement, which he's defined in 2 words, which I thought was quite interesting. And those 2 words are fewer losers. Now, that seems to make a lot of sense in terms of a very snappy soundbite. You know, it means fewer people who are struggling, suffering, in pain. But I wanted to talk a little bit about this concept of winners and losers, because it's something that I have written about quite a lot in the past. President Macron of France, he said in 2017, something of a faux pas, something of a social error. He said he was opening a railway station, I think, in Paris, a new railway station somewhere. And he said a railway station is a fascinating place because you get people who are winners, people who are entrepreneurs, rich businessmen traveling through. And he said you also get people who are nothing. Now, he was criticised very heavily for that, obviously. But Macron's somebody who just things just come into his head, and they shouldn't necessarily be taken as him meaning that people are nothing. But in a way, he was sharing the idea that Rogan has, that some people in life are losers. And defining who is a winner and who is a loser is quite complex, although we have a kind of visceral feeling about who is a winner and who is a loser. And I should preface this by talking about kind of extreme, should we say, right-wing ideology, which suggests that, of course, that winners and losers is a normal part of any hierarchical process. And this is typified by Ayn Rand, who had an idea, something she called objectivism, which was very much about the idea that each woman should be able to express themselves fully despite the consequences and despite those sort of moral questions that sometimes hinder sort of individual expression. In other words, you know, your biological imperative is to become a winner, and you should not feel guilty for treading on all those people as you get to the top, if you like, that kind of thing. But, you know, when we started to introduce the idea of civility, we got rid of that, and that we had an idea of what a society should be like and what a civilized society should be like, and we got into all these other areas, of course. But winners and losers. Yeah, so there was also the idea of the fact that there was something very noble about being a winner. We had this idea of the noble savage, if you like, somebody who was strong and powerful, you know, had leadership skills. And again, that was something that was, you know, not worshipped exactly, but certainly it was idolized, that concept. And I think a lot of what's going on politically at the moment, particularly amongst, shall we say, in the populist area, is this idea that there was something wholly justified about this idea of having winners, and a consequence of that is there being multiple losers. But in a very simple way, let's have a look at what we conceive as being those who win and those who lose. And also, you know, how do we feel ourselves? Am I a winner? Am I a loser? It's a very strange thing, because I think most people, I'm not going to speak for most people, but certainly, I mean, myself and I think many, we perceive ourselves in some ways as losers, which is a bit weird, isn't it? So you think, look, I failed in my relationships, I failed in my career. It could be for any reason. It could be that you didn't take the chances. It could be that you ended up doing something you didn't really want to do. And you can sort of look back and you're full of, it's not actually regrets, it's actually full of anger towards yourself in some ways. And let's be honest, quite a lot of self-pity. So yeah, a lot of the time I would define myself as a loser. Now, objectively, that can't really be correct, can it? Because, for example, I'm still alive, so must have won at something. I haven't spent long stretches in prison and been incarcerated, which is a bit of a half-life. I haven't succumbed to various other, shall we say, worldly temptations that predictably destroy you. So, I'm being very harsh on myself to some extent, and I think a lot of people are extremely harsh when judging themselves. So we have a very simple idea about winners and losers. I was cycling through the park the other day, and as I was cycling through, I was in one of those strange moods where kind of feeling a little bit disassociated. So I was looking at people as like sort of objective creations rather than as sort of, compatriots. And I noticed as cycling through the park that everybody was looking really miserable. Now, they were, I'm talking about brown anoraks, I'm talking about slightly stooped, I'm talking about people who were severely overweight, I'm talking about people who weren't sort of conscious of their surroundings, maybe in their phone, maybe with their hood up, shuffling along. That kind of thing you do see on the streets of cities, let's be honest. A lot of sort of like polyester nylon clothes. Nothing wrong with these things. I'm trying to express the fact that we sometimes use these visual cues to decide if somebody's doing well or isn't, or if it's somebody we want to talk to or we don't. Anyway, the point is that I'm cycling through, and then suddenly there's this young woman. I mean, late 20s. And she's wearing this beautiful white linen dress, and she's kind of looks like a sort of angel on earth. And then a little bit further down the road, as this guy comes out, he's got this beautiful shirt on. It's almost like he's going to a wedding or something, but it's a bit more casual than that. He's got this wonderful shirt on. He's standing upright. He's got the floral pattern. He's wearing these. He's wearing chinos and a very nice pair of sort of Italian brogues, and I thought those two particularly, they stood out against everybody else. And so the visual cue is that there, it seemed that we've got a load of losers, guys on their own, smoking roll-ups, sitting on a park bench with their head bowed. And then you've got, the girl in the beautiful linen dress and the fantastic sort of hair. And then you've got the guy, who looks what we call $1 million. Very simplistic, I know. Of course, the chances are that I've probably got more in common with the guy on the bench and the others in many ways than I have with the apparently really together couple. We don't really know what goes on in other people's lives. So we just take these visual cues. And of course, using the internet and using social media, we're getting constant visual cues, and being able to use that dualistic term winners and losers in terms of our own selves. And I think naturally, if you're anything like me, you also believe that, you probably do believe that on the balance of things, you're a loser. I mean, firstly, we're all losers in a sense. We all lose everything, including our own lives. We lose everyone we love. Most people get to the end of their long sought ambition and find there's nothing there. They work hard and they're onto some project and they achieve it. I presume they've been doing this on the hope that there's going to be some enormous payoff at the end. But of course, there isn't. Very rarely. I've never experienced it anyway, not with me or my friends. normally when you achieve those kind of ambitions, there's actually a sense of emptiness. There's a void at the end of nearly all of those. And so, you know, in a way, it does question the purpose of ambition. Now, these ambitions can take 10, 20, 30 years. It's in half a lifetime sometimes. People are trying to achieve something, which at the end means nothing. So, again, you can't necessarily say someone's a winner because they've achieved X, Y, and Z. And we can win, but we can only really win kind of fleetingly. We can't cure ourselves of these kind of strange feelings we have, existential feelings, by achieving anything that's a kind of worldly ambition or even otherworldly ambition. And pretty much everything else is a myth. I think one of the most interesting experiments when you feel that you are in the Rogan loser camp is to have a look through your contacts book. It's very simple exercise. I mean, if I go through my contacts book, you know, I see some real kind of tragic stories there amongst people who, if you didn't know these people, you might have thought that they were so-called winners. I'm talking about, you know, obviously there's real tragedy. Young people who spent years and years trying to achieve something and then unfortunately have fallen by the wayside for one reason or another. I've got friends who have ended up in psychiatric units quite suddenly, actually. They were working very hard. And they started to, I don't know, perhaps they weren't sleeping very well. They were stressing out at work a lot. They started drinking. This went on for a few weeks and they ended up in psychosis. There's obviously the cancers and the illnesses. There are people who've lost other people. I've got friends who've lost children even, which is, something that you don't really recover from. And these are the kind of the people in my I don't think anybody in my contacts book is immune from this horror. But if you kind of, you know, these are the people in the linen dresses and the people who are, you know, kind of doing well or driving the nice cars. I mean, it's all kind of it's really an illusion to say there's a clear space between the winners in life and the losers. It's really a very difficult thing to try and quantify. So we have to be very careful, I think, when if we're going to go down that path of thinking about, you know, how we can get rid of fewer losers. It's a slightly ambiguous term. However, you know, let's be honest. There are real things that happen to people, which certainly distinguish them. The obvious one is someone who's in pain and someone who isn't in pain. That's very clear. Now, pain, I'm talking here mainly about the psychological pain or the distress of some sort, suffering. And there's no doubt that you can fall into that situation, whether you're a loser or not. That's a slightly kind of strange, abstract idea, but you certainly are in pain. You can't say you're a loser, but you could say you're really in pain. So, you know, you're on the streets, you're living in a dustbin. The chances are that you are actually suffering. And of course, suffering is it's kind of the thing that we all really want to avoid as much as possible. We want to avoid suffering, want to avoid pain. I mean, that should really be enough. That should be enough of anybody's ambition, in my opinion. You know, the idea of becoming CEO of this, that, the other, or startup. Personally, I think that's complete hiding to nothing. I mean, unless you're doing something of real value in some other way, if it's just for yourself, I'm not so sure about it. But you know, that's up to the individual. But certainly, we want to avoid the pain and the suffering. And so we do have to try and think about how to negotiate through life so that we avoid as much pain and suffering as possible. And from this point of view, I think that this Rogan guy is absolutely right, is that it's not really about fewer losers. It's about taking more people away from their pain and suffering. And there are various institutional things that can help with that. I think in America there are, I don't know how many millions of people there are who are addicted to, for example, fentanyl and other things. I mean, fentanyl, well, it's a painkiller, isn't it? I mean, obviously. So, it's not rocket science to work out that because you've got tens of millions of people addicted to a painkiller, by and large, it's because those people are in pain. I mean, they can't bear the form of their own existence. So, nobody wants to fall into that. So there are, well, I can't call them losers, but there are people who are in that situation of pain and suffering, and it would be nice to bring them out. Of course, the problem is that we have objectified generally these people, and that's why we use the word loser. We've objectified them as being somehow that they bring it upon themselves, somehow that they are responsible entirely for their situation. And of course, this isn't really the case, because I'm afraid that the truth is life is unfair. It is very much the luck of the draw. Just one or two decisions, one or two events, one or two circumstances, a happenstance, some coincidence, turning left instead of right, and not just you, but your parents, can alter absolutely everything. And so it's to say that they're responsible is a little bit over the top, actually. I mean, it just doesn't, there's no evidence for that, because if you actually examine the process and the progress of somebody's life, you will find that the direction often depends on just one or two events or decisions. They could have made another decision, they could have done this, they could have done that. And when I say decisions, it's not, most of the time it's not even that. It's pure luck. It's pure chance. And it's not to do with the fact that they have sort of failed in any way and lost. It's just to do with the set of circumstances upon which they have been they have experienced or been born into to some extent. So, but it's worth avoiding. It's worth avoiding this going down this path of vulnerability, if obviously one can help it. The problem is that if you were focusing your whole energy on avoiding pain and suffering and becoming vulnerable, then that would be a full-time job in itself. And that, to me, is winning. Just keeping out of the horror and the pain. That, to me, is winning, okay? But what's happened is that we have been convinced, we have been told, we've been totally indoctrinated with the fact that we need to win through, this sort of extraordinary kind of rope trick of trying to accumulate, large amount of wealth, like perfect relationships, and power, and that, I mean, that's just too much, really. It's hard enough just to stay out of the pain and suffering bit. That is the victory. There's no other victory, not up in this. And the fact is that, we've now made it so that in order just to stay out of pain and suffering, because housing is so expensive, because education is so expensive, because traveling is so expensive, because You know, just the everyday things we need to survive now, the waters and the energy is so expensive because it's all capitalized. Then just trying to achieve the basic level now is incredibly difficult. Now, I know I'm throwing out a huge amount of ideas and things at the same time, and they're nothing new. You know, they're kind of platitudes, I admit that. But nevertheless, I think it's worth saying, because I think in the future, I'm going to dig down on some of this. But I just wanted to get out a kind of like a whole mist of feelings I have about what's going on at the moment. You know, avoiding the horror is enough of an ambition, I think, for anyone. And this is where there's a slight dichotomy, because in order to do that, in order to survive, even on the most basic level, which I think should be enough, that is, you have to play the game. And the game is not very pleasant. The game is very difficult for a lot of people. You know, it's not that easy to box yourself in to being the sort of person that is affable, amiable, and willing to put up with fucking anything, basically. Going to the edge of what's healthy in order to you know, maintain what you need to do, you know, in your work life, because these days, if it's not hurting, it's not working, kind of thing, and that includes in the, you know, at work as well. I remember when I started working many, you know, decades and decades ago, and I was working actually at that time in publishing, and just like after I was a student, and I remember we would have these meetings and these whole days where I would sit down with these graphic designers and people, and we would discuss what font we were going to use for a book. And these were the last days where there was a little bit of room in the office for that kind of thing. And then I remember when that company, they got taken over by a major publishing company. I can't remember who it was. I think it was it Penguin or HarperCollins? I can't remember. And then everything changed. This would have been in the 90s, and everything changed. And the sort of joy of having time to consider things went. We had the deadlines came in, the offices were stripped down, the staff was stripped down to the bare minimum, and you know, so it's tough now. It's not like it used to be. You know, you have to sort of be friends to everybody, because if you alienate people in any way, you know, by being different, by saying things that people can't deal with, you know, it could be by, you know, manifesting your inner self in any kind of visual way that upsets people. If you start alienating people, then there are consequences of that. You kind of get slightly isolated, and then isolation can lead to other situations where you end up becoming slightly vulnerable. You don't necessarily have the kind of support structure that you need. Anyway, I'm slightly rambling as always about this.